episode of Moms on a Mission is brought to you by our good friends at Beverly Hills Precious Metals. In light of bank instability, diversification is a must. Go to bh-pm.com to protect your wealth today and use promo code MISSION to save a little money. That's bh-pm.com, code MISSION. And we have used them and they are so easy to work with. I know it sounds a little daunting when you've never bought gold and silver. It seems like something your grandparents might have done a long time ago.
Yes, but Andrew Sorcini with Beverly Hills Precious Metals has been doing this a very long time.
Very long time.
And he can walk you through step by step and give you the confidence you need to try adding this to your portfolio.
And the Clarks, Clay and Vanessa Clark, have used them for years. And so that's why I looked on the website, but I trusted them because I trusted him because the Clarks did or do. And it's so easy. It literally just shows up on your doorstep a few days after you mail your check off and they receive it, and then you receive your silver.
Yes, and if you go to his website, you can fill out a form and he'll send you some information back. But I'm sure there's lots of testimonies on there as well of people who've had great success using him.
Yeah, he's so busy right now. He's actually opening up another location in Beverly Hills, which is amazing. He's super busy.
Yeah, I'd like to go out and visit his location.
I would too.
I think customers should get to come. We haven't asked him that, but I bet he would welcome us with open arms.
I also think we should get 50% off. Just kidding. I mean, we can think a lot of things. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Yeah. But anyway, bh-pm.com, code MISSION. And we would love to hear from you. We've actually received a couple of emails already from some moms, and we just love opening our inbox and hearing from y'all. And that's moms@momsonamission.net. moms@momsonamission.net. Our website is also momsonamission.net. And all our episodes are there. You can fill out your information and we can be connected that way. And then also we would love for you to follow us on your favorite platform. We on Rumble have moved up to 117 followers now. Yeah.
So we've broken the 100 mark.
We're moving up. So watch out. Anyway, we'd love for you to follow us on Rumble or Apple or your favorite platform. We're on all of them. So yeah, go ahead and follow us today.
Well, today we're going to continue our discussion of the book, Battle for the American Mind. We're going to be on chapter 4, but I want to remind you that we've covered the introduction and preface and the other 3 chapters in previous episodes. So if you want to go back and listen to those, you can get a background, get some, information, and then join us on episode 4. And that's where we're going to start today. So the chapter is entitled The Story of the Progressive Heist. And just as a beginning, there's been a war against Western Christian civilization for over 100 years. The progressives have worked slowly and methodically, and I'd like to say intentionally, to replace the Western Christian Paideia, which we've been talking about for several chapters, and replace it with their own secular Paideia, which we've been calling it, and the book calls it an American Progressive Paideia. Mm-hmm. So you'll see in the book, Western Christian, WCP, and APP, and that's what that means. The step 1 of the plan was to, quote, find the single powerful institution that could facilitate a removal of the Western Christian Paideia, and that was the American public school. So great minds from C.S. Lewis to Neil Postman to Dorothy Sayers, and they may not be famous to you, but in the education world, these were names that were sounding the alarm bells, if you will. They were saying something is going on in our schools. It's not okay. This progressive movement is taking hold. Time out. But people were not listening, didn't really believe it. And so therefore the progressives marched on to take the public school and start infiltrating their progressive ideas.
And, and that was my concern. I was wondering, how did this happen? Like, obviously we didn't know about this takeover. It wasn't in our curriculum in public school. And so I'm just wondering, I was curious before I read the book, like, how did this happen so discreetly, so deceitfully, and no one even said anything? But there were people who were sounding the alarm. And they were ignored. And
I'm in the book, and like, this is just a very few words that we're trying to be concise and summarize for you guys, because it's meaty. It's got a lot of information. It's I've been reading some of the same chapters over, not to scare you, because I'm trying to go deep with it. I really want to understand all the ins and outs. It's a book you're going to have on your bookshelf and want to leave it there, kind of as a resource, I think.
Yeah.
But he talks about several names. Dorothy Sayers, for example, I mean, I know she's, I think it was like in the 1940s when she was writing the C.S. Lewis. They were contemporaries, I think. But several other names you may be familiar with, but high in the education world that I think spent quite a lot of time. And then even modern writers, I think even in the 80s and 90s, maybe in the early 2000s, we're still saying, we're off track here.
Yeah.
And it says, how a lot of people say, how do we miss this? And we've talked about this earlier. Our country was so focused on economics and military Marxism or communism, if you will, that we didn't really notice the cultural part. We were so focused on, building up our economy and fighting off wars of communism that I think we just were thinking, well, and they had a plan for that, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Yes. But using nationalism and patriotic things to kind of move out the Christianity and bring this really great thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like Pete talked, it's not, I love the Pledge of Allegiance and the flag.
It's bad when they replace God.
It's exactly.
It should come after God, but they just put too much emphasis on that so that you wouldn't notice that God was gone.
Yeah. And just a quote from the book, it says, economics and politics follow culture. Culture follows faith. Civilization is now in crisis because cultural Marxism germinated for more than a century.
Yeah, it just all comes down from the top. So, which again, I think this is also brilliant that somebody thought this up and they implemented it so systematically, so consistently, like they had their eye on the prize and they knew what to do to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Classical Christian education has dominated Western culture and the U.S. since the days of the early church. Almost every European nation until 1770 believed that Jesus Christ was the reigning king over the entire world. In fact, with Christ being at the center, that's how they decided to articulate events in time, BC and AD. Before that, it was based on in the year of our king so-and-so. So it was based on a more humanistic or from a more humanistic perspective. And then at one time, Europe all agreed that, everything was based on BC and AD, and that Jesus Christ, the kingdom of Christ, was the focus, not the kingdom of man. And we'll continue and talk about that more a little bit later. But since Christ was at the center of these nations, a paideia was formed around their belief and allegiance to Christ, bringing about what we said, the Western Christian Paideia or the WCP. So it just naturally happened as everything was surrounded by Christ, and Christ influenced everything. And during the colonial period in America, almost all children received a classical Christian education. It was the standard, but soon it began to change.
Well, this is a great history lesson too. For those of you that are just thinking this is just about education. Well, it is about the history of education, but just even this idea of that before 1770, everything, like you were just saying, the calendar, but the magnitude, they go into it a little deeper in the book. That was a great history lesson for me. And it made me think too, when we did some traveling last summer to England and seeing some of these, to us, like, oh, this was 1600s or 1500s or 1400s, and how all of it was so religious and so, all encompassing with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And
I think that's why you see in education today, there is this push to not go too far back, because, and Pete talked about this, like, if you go too far back, you might see the Christian roots and the Christian foundation, and you might notice like, oh my gosh, Jesus Christ was a part of everything and was in everything, and everything was through him, by him, directed to him.
The cathedrals, all the monuments, everything was Jesus Christ was the center. And they knew that we were all in Christ's kingdom. We were subject to him first.
Yes.
So that was I think I had probably read that and have skimmed along, but now this really hit my heart a lot deeper when I realized how it had changed.
Yeah. And that kingdom is such a powerful word, because that kingdom, Christ's kingdom versus, man's kingdom, and the whole focus he is the lens. And that what you said is true. I didn't realize that Europe, I didn't realize that until I was reading this book, like before 1770. I didn't realize that they had really they had their own Christian Paideia themselves. I remembered in reading from the Greeks that they helped establish that, but I didn't realize how pervasive it was in all of Europe.
Yeah. And that's why we really got it in the United States,
right?
Because most of our forefathers came from Western Europe.
Yeah.
So at the time of America's founding, two ideas moved us away from Western Christian culture. First was deism, replaced Jesus Christ with a generic passive God. Quote, to progress with this American vision, there could be no recognition of Christ in public institutions. The two kingdoms were no longer a pair. Deism discounted the divinity of Christ, authentic scriptures, and the authority of the church. This was all new information for me. I'm going to tell you, this part of the chapter was difficult, and I read it several times. I had heard the word deism. I probably had looked it up, but this finally started to sink in. And part of it was a little bit hard for me because I didn't want any of our founding fathers to be deists, because I thought it was something different. And when it was so clearly defined that the point of deism was or the way that we define it is that Jesus Christ is taken out of that.
Right.
Out of the mix.
And when you think of the word deism, it's a God structure or construct, and it sounds good, and it really is similar to what's happening today with the words. Like, you're served a palatable word, but then the meaning is changed. Yeah. And that's a whole nother podcast. But it's interesting to me that they did this. This was happening, this war on narratives. It was happening way back then.
A long time. Yeah.
So when you,
in the very beginning of the
you
country.
can easily, if you don't know, you can easily think, oh God, that's a good thing or whatever. But it was a construct used to alter and cause people to look at this entity of God not being attached to Jesus Christ as palatable and okay, and accept that. Yeah. Which made way and opened the door for all the other things that they wanted to bring down the pipe.
And so how this relates to the founding fathers, and this may be repeat information for some of you, but it was pretty new for me, especially in this way. It said Christians and deists came together to form our nation in its founding documents, but they viewed God and the scriptures very differently. So the deists and the Christians viewed God very differently. Quote, with all due reverence and gratitude for the founding generation, the diminished role of Christ's kingdom in America's founding would unintentionally create vulnerabilities that progressives eventually exploited. And now I see that. I had no idea before. And the book goes into some very specific details, especially with Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and some of the other ones that were deists, and some of our national seal, and some of the symbols that we see are really based in deism and not Jesus Christ.
Right. And they do talk about that seal and how you can go over to Europe and you see their various structures. You'll see seals of their kind, and there's a way to mark it, and that's a Christian, a God construct versus the deism, and that was incredibly sad. And let me just say something about what you said. It's hard to think of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson as deists and not necessarily Christians, but this is the whole point of going to primary sources and learning about our founding fathers. This is a good thing for us to know the truth.
Absolutely.
And that's the whole point. And some of them weren't perfect, and it wasn't all pretty and perfect and wrapped up in a little bow. Some of our founding fathers had quite messy stories.
Yeah. And I mean, and like I said, we're reading this book. This is a book review. I haven't done a deep dive. I have read Benjamin Franklin, one of his biographies. He seemed to be a deeply religious man. He spoke a lot about Jesus Christ in the Bible. So this is what Pete Hegseth and David Goodwin are saying in this book. And this is one part. So this is what they are saying. It's not what I'm saying.
Right.
Although it makes a lot of sense, but I would encourage people to do your own reading about these men. And they were, like I said, they were flawed, just like all the men and women that lead our country today.
Right.
We all have things, and especially when you look back in history, It seems like we kind of can find the faults and really focus on those sometimes rather than focusing on what they did that was good, especially looking at, like you always say, the lens of 1776 rather than 2023.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Although I do trust the research of Pete Hegseth. I'm not taking issue. I'm just saying add to it with primary sources.
Yeah.
Read Benjamin Franklin, read Thomas Jefferson, read George Washington, so that you can do your own research and find out your own answers. But I think the biggest point is that this little break, this between deism and Christianity, was a little bit of a
crack in the door.
Yep, for the progressives to come in, and that's the argument they're making.
And it was such good timing for them to capitalize on that.
Yeah, it was.
So progressives made school mandatory. So we talked about the plasticity of the child, and that was duly noted and capitalized on. And so they made schools mandatory. Horace Mann was the leader of that movement from 1840 to 1860. He was the first leader. And then we'll talk about later, John Dewey was the man who actually implemented it nationally and got it to spread throughout the nation. But Horace Mann is considered to be the leader of the movement. And it was the German mechanistic education replaced the older classical tradition. So this I thought was interesting when I read it as well, that they didn't just come up with their own idea, but adopted. These folks came from Germany, and they implemented some of these same schooling choices and systems and replaced them, and kind of just tried to make everybody feel like the old was the older ways, that it was just
old fashioned, out of date.
We need to move on and be more progressive. And like we said in other podcasts, I mean, progressivism has had some good points as it relates to women voting and child labor laws.
Social reform.
But unfortunately, it has a lot of bad things too, as it relates to moving Jesus Christ out of the foundational or the foundation for our country. By 1918, all U.S. children were required by law to attend school. So you can imagine, if they can mandate that children need to go to school, then they think, oh, so then once we get them into school, we can use propaganda, we can indoctrinate them.
Well, common core curriculum. Common core curriculum is a new sounding to us, but there were common curriculums being used back then too.
And when you think about it, this task must have been daunting to think, how can we systematically affect everyone in this nation? How can we strip this nation of a Western Christian Paideia? I mean, everything. I mean, look at our money. Praise the Lord. It still says in God we trust. But I mean, literally the good Christian tentacles had reached to every level of our country. And so this must have been such a daunting proposition for them to think, how are we going to reach them? So mandating school and then hijacking the curriculum was just brilliant, because then you create these kids who turn into these adults with this, And
that was something I remember you saying or pointing out to me, was in the beginning when Horace Mann was doing all this implementation of public school, government school, they would allow kids to go home and have religious training at home, but they were, was that Horace Mann or John Dewey?
No, that was the Gary plan.
Okay.
So they first implemented it. And then once it's all about,
that sounds pretty good. You could like, well, I don't argue with that. This is the new school, but they get to go home and do religious education and do the other part.
And this is chapter 5, which that will be another episode. But
I'm getting ahead of myself.
But it's very interesting. So what she's saying is incredibly interesting, because that was the first time God was removed from the school ever, or education of children. That was the first time God had been removed, which is so sad. I mean, we look at prayer being moved out of schools, but really it was even, back before then. So the consequence of this, quote, over this time period, state and local governments took on the role of schoolmaster, supplanting the church, end quote. And late in the 1800s, the Protestant church was divided, and one side joined the progressives and the other side did not pursue education as a priority. So the Western Christian Paideia was basically forgotten. And so that now there was this focus on the social gospel.
Mhm.
So progressive mainline Protestants versus the fundamentalist, moody evangelism. And there was this divide at this point, and the battle and divide between these two forms of Christianity helped push the plans of the progressives forward. So they saw that crack in the door and they moved in.
Yeah. And I think this is something I really could see in my own life watching this play out, even though this happened. I think Moody was around the late 1800s. That's when he started, or when the gist of his ministry. But I could see that in my own life, watching the churches change from what maybe they originally started to be, and then the mainline Protestant churches changing into this more social reform programs, if you will, getting involved in the feminist movement and social, even just lately, the social justice. That's the big, term that we use a lot now. But the church is joining in. And then you had the evangelical side that basically, they didn't take on those as much gusto, but their whole focus was on evangelism.
Yes.
Just what it says, to reach people with the gospel and get hearts to come to Jesus Christ, which you can't argue with that. No. But because of this, the education, our schools, Christian schools that had Western Christian Paideia, went to the government. Yeah. It's like, we don't need to mess with that anymore. We'll let the government take over that. But I will say one group that didn't do that were the Catholics. They stayed involved in Christian education. I'm thankful for that.
So thankful.
Yeah. They kept their eye on the prize with education. But those two mainline Protestant denominations, as they splintered, created a place for the progressives to come in. And what was a better place than the school?
Yeah, it was brilliant. I tell Julie that all the time we talk about it. I just say, this was so brilliant of them. And then they took the time and the patience, and they kept methodically, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, just kept chipping away and kept putting new constructs in place and things that they could do to systematically chip away at this, to the point where when they did pull prayer out of schools, it was just the next logical step.
Yeah, people didn't. There was some uproar that was before our time.
You sure?
But it wasn't probably like you thought it should be, because like you said, it was just happening slowly over time. Right. So it was kind of expected, or even like, oh, sure, we need to take prayer out of school. We don't need it there. That needs to be in the church.
Separation of
over here.
State.
Yeah.
We that's a whole other podcast too.
That is. So progressives envision a utopian new order, and I've learned a lot about that word utopia.
They use it quite a bit in the book.
They do use it quite a bit, but this idea of perfect, like the progressives we're progressing to this perfect world without God. Yeah, sure, okay.
Man's going to find it and create this perfect world without Jesus, which is such, again, the antithesis of Christ. We are the whole perspective that we are fallen and in need of a savior. We're born sinners in need of salvation. And it's completely the opposite.
Absolutely. In order to push the progressive agenda, progressives joined ideas from Marxist government and the social gospel. This made Marxist ideas more palatable. Some pastors and clergy started to depend on government to solve economic and social problems rather than the church. Progressives sought to unite America around this new vision of new order through a long-term fusion of politics, academia, pseudo-Christianity, culture, and the classroom. So again, I see that all over the place. This, and that's from the book. That's not me. Should have been a quote. So this fusion of politics, academia, pseudo-Christianity, culture, and the classroom.
Yeah, I believe there were so many moving parts. As we were saying before, the focus was on rejecting the communism and economic Marxism. And that was a job, and that needed to be done too. And I just believe there's so many, these men who came over from Germany, they were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I'm so impressed, in not a good way, but impressed how they were able to carry this out. And as it relates to the government, as it relates to getting the money to back, like you'll see in the book, they talk about Rockefeller backing. That might have been in the Miseducation of America on Fox Nation. We've watched those episodes. Those are so good. And actually,
which is a good time. Yeah, that's a good time to give that a little plug, because Miseducation of America goes right along with the book, has great interviews, and you will learn a lot more if you watch that along with reading the book. It'll make a lot of things make more sense.
Yeah.
He goes into depth, and he has commentary from different teachers and authors and just political figures of our day, great thinkers.
Yeah. So please watch that. But anyway, we believe that the key here is just to, if you need to, like, I know some folks who don't care to read and they want to listen to the information, and maybe start with Fox Nation and start with listening and then get the book. I mean, sometimes that's helpful too. So whatever works for you. But so the Progressive School Project builds a God-free paideia. So immigration brought many new ideas, more religions, more diversity. So that was, again, perfect time. We talk about the crack in the church, and now you have another variable that is helping, mix up and stir up this paideia pot, if you will. A new point of unity was needed, and so school replaced the church. There was huge success in industry and capitalism, and it spurred on radical activism such as Margaret Sanger feminism, labor movements. I mean, and like we talked about, some of the progressive changes with the child labor laws, and
they were good.
Voting were very good. So in that respect, that was needed and helped. But the bottom line, it was when they took God and put God down and put things above God. Yeah.
And you want to just break it down.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly hierarchy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the progressive seemed patriotic and not radical. So that was the whole idea, was they needed a thing, something that could replace Christianity, but something where you could give your heart to and be loyal to. And that was patriotism.
Yeah. Who can argue with that?
No. And like we said before, patriotism is wonderful and needed, but nothing at the expense.
And especially when you think of coming out of like a world war, I can't remember when the Bellamy Pledge and salute was that, I can't remember was that in the 1940s or 50s?
I think it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if you go back, even if it was further, but I know it's not before World War I. So World War I, you had, these events where people needed patriotism and rallying around the flag
to unite the country together.
So you can see why that worked.
They were kind of susceptible, right?
Yeah.
Well, and the Bellamy salute was our first Pledge of Allegiance, and Bellamy was a socialist, and the original salute was kind of like the salute when,
like this,
like the angled, like you'll see it with Nazi Germany, how they.
There's a picture in the book in the Battle for the American Mind, and it's
gut wrenching.
Yeah, it looks very familiar in a bad way.
Yeah. And so that was our original Pledge of Allegiance. And I believe it was it Wilson, who, I think we'll get into this a little bit later, who added in our Pledge of Allegiance under God. But the original one was a pure socialist wrote this, which with the idea and intention of shifting our hearts and our focus on nationalism and away from Jesus Christ. So, and then Francis Willard, the experiment proved Lincoln's philosophy in the schoolroom in one generation becomes the philosophy of the government in the next. And that's Pete talks about that being one of his favorite quotes. But again, just brilliant to think of it, and then incredibly impressive in the worst possible way that they were able to implement it the way they did.
And Frances Willard, was the woman who took curriculum during the temperance movement. I think I'm right about that. And so she started with third graders talking about how horrible alcohol was.
And this really, I think Pete, I can't remember his Pete, we've watched the Miseducation of America, but one of them says that they believe that this example with Francis Willard and this experiment with the abolition of alcohol and went into these third grade classrooms and started teaching about how alcohol was so bad, and then did that year after year after year.
They got rid of alcohol.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
made an amendment to the Constitution.
They believe that it was this experiment.
I mean, it makes sense.
It does make sense.
It really does.
It's brilliant. Again, they're thinking, get to the kids. get to the kids, and then you get to the heart of the nation.
Yep. So education in the Western Christian Paideia is replaced with vocational training. And John Dewey, who we call the father, is he the father of public institution, or was that Horace Mann? I get them confused. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I do.
So Horace Mann actually started the concept of public education, where
John Dewey took it off,
and he spread it across the nation.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so his big thing was replacing liberal arts with vocational training. So he felt like the liberal arts were for the elite. He didn't see the need for just everyday Americans to have a liberal arts education.
Well, and I believe, don't quote me on this, because I'm not going to say this exactly the way he said it, but what he did say was he thought that it was too rigorous. When Julie's saying liberal arts, she's talking about rhetoric, logic, grammar, big questions like, why are we here?
Very basic education even when I was in college. I did have a liberal arts education, even in the 90s. Mm-hmm. It was still, probably not as good as it could have been, but that's what I learned in college. I had a true liberal arts education. Sure, it was watered down some because progressives had definitely pushed through, but it was still very well respected.
Right. Well, and let's just be honest. He knew kids could handle grammar, logic, and rhetoric, because that's how our presidents were trained. Yes. That's how thousands and thousands of years, this is how kids were trained, and brilliant minds resulted from that training. And so the whole thought process was that, well, only, Dewey was like, now only the elites get that. And we need people to do vocational things, and they need to be taskmasters.
Work in factories.
That's right.
Yeah. Very specific tasks. We don't want you to think. And C.S. Lewis, and I'm definitely not going to quote it, but there's a great quote in the book about this very thing, and taking out the liberal arts education. And basically what he's saying is, when you stop liberal arts education, you stifle critical thinking, and without critical thinking, civilization comes to an end.
That's right.
And that very thought-provoking. And I'm not going to argue with, I am never going to argue with C.S. Lewis.
No.
He's one of the most brilliant minds of the last 100 years. So yes, so that's a good warning from him. But progressives have been intentional with their strategies to transform America, while most of us were ignorant to their plans. Progressives knew for many years they were in a war for America. The other side did not catch on. The progressives knew the fight would be long and hard. They had declared war on Western Christian Paideia. And I'm going to conclude by reading one chapter out of the book.
And then not the whole chapter.
Not the whole.
She's going to, we'll be here another 2 hours.
One paragraph, and I'm going to try to get through it. And then we'll be done with chapter 4. And with that, we had a declaration of war in black and white. If we hope to defeat America's longtime progressive opponents, we must fight back, not just harder, but wiser. We need to prepare children who, with an independent mind, still revere divine order, lest they succumb to anarchy. We need to train children to apply reason, to find truth sourced in God, not themselves, and to reject indoctrination. If we do this, the young will find higher meaning and a higher purpose. Their job will be a part of who they are, not a life-defining purpose. We will return to an America recognized for its strong-spirited citizens who live in community rather than eventually dying as weak servants of the state.
Boom.
There you go.
Yeah, that's
chapter 4.
Chapter
Done.
4. You're welcome.
Read it.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us at Moms on a Mission. We would love to hear from you too. Let's get connected. First, follow us on your favorite platform. We're moving up to, we want to hit 200 followers in the next few weeks. So follow us on your favorite platform. And then also check us out on our website, momsonamission.net. You can fill in your address, your email address, and we can get connected that way. And then email us with questions or comments at moms@momsonamission.net. That's moms@momsonamission.net.
Moms on a Mission's excited to partner with our friends at MyPillow. According to sleep experts and sleephealth.org, over 50 million Americans struggle to get a good night's rest. That's where MyPillow comes in. They make the best pillows, sheets, mattresses, and mattress toppers. Several years ago, I was having trouble falling and staying asleep due to neck and shoulder pain. Luckily, I heard an ad about MyPillow and decided to give it a try. After 3 or 4 days, I really began to feel a difference. I was sleeping better and my neck and shoulders felt so much better. MyPillow really does help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. Moms on a Mission wants you to get a great night's rest too. Go to mypillow.com right now and use the promo code MISSION for up to 66% off your purchase. MyPillow products are made in America and have a 60-day money-back guarantee and lifetime warranty. Remember, go to mypillow.com, put in the special code MISSION for your special Moms on a Mission discount. Thank you and God bless.
Hey guys, it's Moms on a Mission here. Are you worried about your financial stability and protecting the money for which you work so hard? The problem is stock market volatility and inflation. You may be wondering what you can do to preserve your family's wealth. We at Moms on a Mission encourage you to reach out to our friend Andrew Sorcini with Beverly Hills Precious Metals. Andrew is the expert in educating you to help you find the right balance of gold and silver for your family portfolio. He made it so easy for me to add precious metals to my financial investments. I simply mailed a check to Beverly Hills Precious Metals and my silver showed up on my doorstep a few days later. It was so easy. Go to bh-pm.com to save a little money and tell them that Moms on a Mission sent you. That's bh-pm.com. Don't wait. Protect your wealth today by going to bh-pm.com and tell them that Moms on a Mission sent you. Hi everybody, it's Moms on a Mission here. Recent research from the CDC says that millions of Americans develop parasitic infections and symptoms often go unnoticed or are misdiagnosed.
Parasites are the cause of many health problems, such as anxiety, depression, chronic pain, fatigue, and unexplained digestive issues. We all need a common sense strategy to improve our health.
We at Moms on a Mission encourage you to reach out to our good friend, Dr. Jason Dean. Dr. Dean's Full Moon Protocol provides all-natural detoxification and fights inflammation. These supplements are made with 100% organic ingredients and are proven to kill parasites safely and effectively.
To order your Full Moon Protocol, go to bravetv.store/mission to save $20 off your first order. That's bravetv.store/mission. Order Full Moon Protocol and start killing those foreign invaders that have been keeping you sick. That's bravetv.store/mission to receive $20 off your first order.